What's up, world? Welcome back to the Real News Network. I'm Jared Ball, again here in Baltimore, and we're continuing our conversation with Bret Grote, legal director of the Abolitionist Law Center, as we look again critically at the unity of the Koch brothers, Van Jones, Newt Gingrich, Eric Holder, the Obama administration, and others, as they claim to be addressing the issue of mass incarceration. Bret Grote, welcome back.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
So you were outlining some of your concerns with the proposal in our last segment, and we'll invite people, if they haven't, to go back and check out part one. Of course, that'll make this conversation make much more sense. Let's continue to talk about your critical views here of this unity. So you outlined a little bit of the Obama administration's perspective of this. But one of the questions that I did want to ask you is there a secondary market that the Koch brothers could be looking to get into? That is, if the prison population is being drawn down officially in terms of the prison system, is there something else that they could probably be looking to capitalize off of rather than it as their own campaign? The We Are Koch campaign is suggesting that they've sort of just made some sort of ideological shift to being more concerned with how people are treated here in the United States, specifically those who are incarcerated. But could you respond to that concern, at least that I have, in their motives here?
Right. While I'm not certain of any particular investments the Koch brothers may be pursuing along these lines, it has been the case that alternatives to incarceration, whether you're talking about reentry programs, halfway houses, so-called community corrections, drug courts, mental health courts, etc., as these have been propagated around the country, they have become appendages rather than replacements to the existing system. And while incarceration rates might, rise or fall a little bit in the state or federal systems from year to year, the system of control continues to expand outside of the specific confines of the prison in probation and parole systems. And so I think it would be entirely predictable that there are going to be markets that are opened up so that private capital in collusion with the government are figuring out ways to make sure that the underclass that is subjected to mass incarceration is then going to be subjected to state and corporate control upon their release into more cost-effective means of repression. So I think this is entirely predictable, and we can check back in a year or two and see what sort of investments are going on along these lines. But I think it's something to be very wary of.
The other thing I wanted to ask you is that for someone who has been involved with the abolitionist movement for so long, that is prison abolitionist movement for so long, and one who also deals with political prisoners specifically, I'm wondering what you think it means for how people interpret our situation or interpret or develop analyses for redressing these problems that we face in terms of incarceration or any other. That is there something ideologically or politically narrowing in terms of its impact on the rest of us when we see these sort of coalitions forming from the established right and the established left that might limit the ideas we develop and the methods that the ideas around which we organize to address these concerns. So if you understand my question, I'm wondering what you think about that, and if this coalition with the Koch brothers and Van Jones represents something that could inhibit more progressive organizing efforts to address this and then many other issues.
Yes, absolutely. I understand the question. It's exactly where I think this conversation should go. I think the narrowing of the problem and how it's defined is one of the primary purposes for this bipartisan push for reform. As an aside, the bipartisan nature of the reform effort really isn't remarkable at all. The Democratic and Republican parties have been united in criminal legal policies and practices for decades, since time immemorial, including the rise of mass incarceration. But if we were to go back to Obama's speech for a moment, he defines mass incarceration as a problem of locking up nonviolent drug offenders for too long. This is not empirically supported. The data shows that there were 3 waves leading to the consistent rise in the incarcerated population. The first one in the 70s, which had to do with sending people convicted of more minor felonies to prison at greater rates. Then there are the drug convictions associated with the cynical and pretextual drug war, which was really just an excuse for paramilitary occupation of communities of color. And then in the early to mid 90s, we began to see increased sentences for a wide variety of offenses, including and especially the increase of life sentences and life without parole sentences. But in defining the issue of mass incarceration, of one that is giving us, quote, diminishing returns on public safety, another remark that Obama made, or that is not, cost effective, it is ignoring the fact that the system of mass incarceration was a deliberately designed, calculated, meticulously legislated and constructed effort to create the largest penal system that the world has ever seen, that incarcerates Black people at 4 to 5 times the rate of apartheid South Africa, and that is a system of race and class control. It is a system of heteropatriarchal power and social structuring. If a politician were to have said in the 80s or the 90s that their plan for public safety was to have a massive increase in agents of state violence, to saturate poor communities and communities of color, to engage in racially discriminatory surveillance, arrest, and charging, to especially target those with mental health issues, developmental disabilities, those who are survivors of childhood trauma and sexual violence, and to round these people up and put them in densely concentrated, fortified institutions where every single decision of their life was micromanaged and subjected to rigid, arbitrary, punitive control. If any politician were to have made that speech, they would have been looked at as a fascist. So they packaged it differently as tough on crime and have created a system of control that is quite formidable. And now they are tinkering around the edges because we are in the midst, not just of growing critique of this system, but in a full-blown legitimacy crisis of the neoliberal mass incarceration states. And they are doing what they can to try to steer popular rebellion and activism into the safe channels of electoral reformism, into legislative lobbying, and in the case of Obama and Bill Clinton at the NAACP convention that they spoke of, into Hillary Clinton's campaign for president.
Bret Grote, thank you very much for joining us here in this edition of Real News Network, this segment of the Real News Network. And we'll follow up with you another time to talk about more specifically about your work with political prisoners and most specifically around your work with Russell Maroon Schultz. But thank you very much, Bret Grote, Legal Director of the Abolitionist Law Center. Thank you for joining us here at the Real News Network.
Thanks for having me, Jared. My pleasure.
And thank you for joining us here at the Real News Network. For all involved, I'm Jared Ball here in Baltimore. And as always, like Fred Hampton used to say to you, we say peace if you're willing to fight for it. We'll catch you in the whirlwind, everybody. Peace.